Hello, this is Daddy Sage. Some years ago I made a video called A Trip Through Doulaland, recorded with my dashboard cam. This time I'm gonna record with other cameras, not my dashboard cam, as I didn't bring one. But anyway, this is German Hill. Up on that hill, where today is only a few modern houses, was where the victim Laura Foster lived with her father and her two brothers. Her mother had passed away together with two younger siblings a couple of years earlier during a flu epidemic. There's nothing to see up there, so I will not go up there as it is private property. But before I start, just a short introduction to the three main characters. This is Tom Dooley. All three paintings are by the late Edith Ferguson Carter, and they are not portraits, they are painted from the descriptions in the legends as Edith Carter knew these legends. This is, of course, Tom Dooley in a Confederate uniform. And this is Laura Foster, the victim, who was found in a shallow grave about 3 months after she had disappeared from her home on a beautiful May morning. And this is Anne Melton, known as the other woman. Actually, she was the one that Tom Dooley had an affair with in the beginning, and you could call Laura Foster the other woman. Many people believe that Anne Melton was the actual killer. Others believe that another woman called Pauline Foster was the actual killer, and some, of course, believe that the killer was Tom Dooley. But that's not what this video is about. It's just to show you the different places connected to the case. And this is a memorial plaque telling about Laura Foster, the victim, who died May 28th, 1866, according to the plaque, but actually she died Friday, May 25th, 1866. It also tells about her grave, and it's on land belonging to a Winkler family, which is definitely not true. The Winkler never owned land here, and Laura is probably not buried where it says she is. I'll get back to that in a second. Behind this little white fence is where Laura supposedly is buried. There's also a stone on the grave, but it has the dates of her killing wrong, sorry to say. On the other hand, she might be buried there, but it's definitely uncertain. Aerial photos of this area from around 1950 shows definitely no grave here in this field, only a field. On the other hand, you can't be sure. It has never been tested with ground-penetrating radar, but what is told is that the Winkler family wanted so badly to be connected to the Tom Dooley case, so they invented the whole story, including that this used to be their land and Laura was buried here. As you might be able to see, the grave is on private property, and there's an electrical fence around the field, so I can't get closer. I have been there once, so I may be able to include a photo of the gravestone in this video. And look at the clouds hanging low today. And this is a close-up of Laura's grave and her gravestone. The gravestone was set up many years later, around 1959, and unfortunately the date on the stone is not correct. On the stone it says she was killed in 1865, but it was actually in 1866. I believe the information came from a newspaper article around 1859, and this newspaper article had simply the date wrong. The small church on top of the hill is called Maria's Chapel. named for Maria Ernest, the one who financed it. As it was only built in 1875, it did not exist at the time of the murder, but a few of the people involved in the case are buried up here, so I'll just take a look at it anyway. This is the gravestone of Dr. George Nicholas Carter, who treated all the main characters, Anne Melton, Laura Foster and Tom Dooley, as well as Pauline Foster, for syphilis. It was also Dr. Carter who examined Laura's body when the grave was finally found 3 months after her disappearance. Next to Dr. Carter is his wife, Julia Carter, who was a descendant of Tom's grandfather's brother, Captain William Doula. The doctor's daughter, Anne Carter Council, and his son, George Hill Carter, who also served as a doctor in this area, is also buried here. This is actually the gravestone of George Hill Carter. And this is actually the gravestone of Martha Maria Ernest, who financed the erection of this chapel. Also, a couple of the witnesses is buried on the Maria Chapel Cemetery, but as it's a cold and rainy day, I don't want to walk around looking for them. But at least I remember that Francis Melton's grave is up here, and the one of his wife. So, with this glimpse of a small creek, I will leave Maria's Chapel and carry on my trip. Right now I'm at Grandin Baptist Church, another church that didn't exist at the time of the murder, but in this cemetery you find the grave of Colonel James M. Isbell and his wife Sarah Louise Isbell. James was Tom Dooley's eager pursuer before and during the trial. His wife, Sarah Louise Isbell, was actually Tom's second cousin. Today, there's not much to see here, but in the early 1900s, this was actually the site of a timber town, a very successful timber town with its own railroad or railway line. But in 1916 and 1918, two large floods of the Yadkin River washed away the railway line, and that caused the timber town to die. All that's left from that time is the house with the blue shutters in the background, which used to be the boarding house of this village. Today it's a private property, a private home. The Isbell family had their home somewhere down here. You can't see it, there's nothing left of it, but that was where their home was until Sarah Louise passed away in 1919. Her husband James has passed away already in 1913. I'm now approaching what is known as the Doula Horton Cemetery, a cemetery which is on the National Register of Historic Places. This cemetery was founded in 1835 by a brother of Tom's grandfather, Captain William Doula. Tom's grandfather's name was Bennett Doula. We'll get back to his place in a while. Several of the witnesses from the trial is buried here in this cemetery. Some of the stones are rather weathered, as I can tell you, and I can show you in a while, but some of them is readable. This is actually the stone of Captain William Doula, who was the first to be buried here back in 1835. And next to him his wife, Theodosia Doula, and Captain William Horton, who is the other part of the Doula Horton cemetery name, and his wife Mildred Horton, who was actually a daughter of Captain Doula. This is the stone of Phineas Horton, who actually owned what was known as Coal Store at the time of the killing. Cole had sold the store back in 1858. And the stone of Rufus Doula Horton, one of the witnesses at the trial, a character witness for Mrs. Doula, Tom's mother. Rufus's house is actually only house belonging to one of the witnesses that are still standing today, though if not in a very nice state. Another witness was Catlett Jones, who was also married to a daughter of Captain William Doula. And finally, this is the stone of Major David E. Horton, who discovered Laura's grave together with his son-in-law, Colonel James Isbell. And this is what is left of the home of Rufus Doula Horton, but anyway, it's still the only home that's still left from any of the witnesses. When Tom Dooley's father passed away in 1854, his mother inherited his land up here in the hills, and where this modern day house is where Mary Doula's cabin stood, where she lived with her son Tom and Tom's older sister Eliza at the time of the murder. There's nothing left, of course, because there's a modern house now, but this is where it was. And this is the actual door from Mary Doula's cabin, where she lived with her son Tom and her daughter Eliza at the time of the murder. The door was the front door of the cabin, but today it's used as an inside door in a house where a descendant of Dr. Carter, who bought the cabin when Mary Doula moved away, he stored the door, and today it is installed here. And this is Reedy Branch. The path from Tom's mom's house to Lottie Foster's house ran along this branch. There's a lot of water in the branch today, so quite a bit of current. Up on this ridge, in a thicket of laurel, where was Laura's grave, or Laura's body was found in a shallow grave 3 months after her disappearance, around September 1st, 1866. There's nothing to see up there. Even if people see, you can still see an indentation where the grave was. I have not been able to find it though, so maybe it's gone now, or maybe you should have be together with someone who know exactly where to look. But anyway, it was up this hill. Up this small road is a small cemetery, the Melton Cemetery, and there you find Anne's grave. Unfortunately, someone had bought the property since my last visit, and it's now private property. The gate is open, but I don't want to go up there as it is posted land. That means you can get sued to enter without permission. And I don't know who I should ask for permission. Apparently a camper has been set up there, or a trailer. Last time I was here, there was absolutely nothing except some very old houses. And a little up the road, behind the gate, you find the Melton Family Cemetery, and this is where Anne Melton is buried. This is her stone, put up as late as in 2012. Also, the second stone up here is the one of James Melton's sister, Anne's sister-in-law, Sarah Melton Walsh. The place where there's absolutely nothing to see today is this small area where Lottie Foster's cabin used to be. It's long gone and nothing is left. And this is apparently where the Bates place where the murder took place is supposed to have been. Sorry. Once again, there's nothing left to see here except for the trees. Which have, of course, not the trees that were there 150 years ago. Tall trees on the ridge was actually present 150 years ago. These trees were actually situated around the house where Anne and James Melton lived, a little bit up on the ridge from her mother's house. And the ridge, as you can maybe see behind the trees, was where she used to meet with Tom Dooley during their affair. And this is Doe Creek in Pandora, where Tom was arrested after he had left his job on Colonel Grayson's farm in Trade, Tennessee. This is a little bit north of Mountain City in Tennessee. And this is a mural in exactly Mountain City depicting Tom getting arrested while he's cooling his feet, his blistered feet in Doe Creek in Pandora. The photo is of course not correct, as only 3 people were present when Tom was arrested, 2 deputy sheriffs and Colonel Grayson, and the only one who had a gun, it was a handgun, was Colonel Grayson. When Tom was arrested in Pandora, Tennessee, a place I have not visited for this video, he was brought back to Wilkes County in North Carolina and incarcerated in what was then a very modern brick jail built in 1859, only 7 years before Tom's arrest. Today, the old jail serves as a part of Wilkes Heritage Museum. The top floor was where Tom was incarcerated, in the cell where there are many bars in front of the windows. In the cell next to it, his accomplice and Melton was incarcerated. The many bars was actually put up when Tom was there because he was considered to be desperate and an escape risk. But he did not escape. He stayed in this prison for about 3 months from his arrest in July to the trial in October. The trial took place in the local courthouse, which is not existing anymore. Then he was transferred to Iredell County, to the town of Statesville, where I will go next. This is what today is known as Old Wilkes Courthouse, or Wilkes Old Courthouse, but it was built in 1902 when the old courthouse, a wooden courthouse where Tom was actually tried for the first time, was torn down. Today this courthouse serves as Wilkes Heritage Museum, and you can go on guided tours to the old jail from the museum. The 1860s, at this place where now an old courthouse stand, was an even older wooden courthouse, and it was where Tom Dooley's trials took place in 1866, 2 times in 1887, and the final trial in 1888. When Tom Dooley and Ann Melton was transferred from Wilkes County, the jail in Wilkes County, they were actually transferred to the old and much less secure wooden prison in Statesville. This prison was where now the Edward Jones Investment Office is, right on the corner of Broad Street and Cooper Street. In order to make sure that nobody escaped, the court has ordered or allowed the sheriff to hire an 8-man guard to guard Tom Dooley alone. Actually, I don't think Anne Melton was incarcerated in the jail, as she's not mentioned in a list of prisoners, so she must have been incarcerated somewhere else, maybe at the local drunk tank. When Tom Dooley was executed, he was taken from the jail on Broad Street and led to the place of execution, which was somewhere on a field next to the railway station. The railway station, or the depot, was at that time on this side of the track, where now Bartlett Milling Company is. So exactly where the execution took place is very hard to say. Some say it was on this side of the railway track, most say it was on the other side of the railway track. I don't know actually what to believe. The latest I've heard was that it was here, right at the end of South Center Street, and it was Tom was executed here because then the cart he was on didn't have excuse me, to cross the tracks. On the other hand, there's a bit of a hill here, and as you may have heard from in my other videos, he was executed at a place known as the circus lot, and I don't think you would put up a circus on a hill. But of course this could be wrong, that the was not called the circus lot, or rather that he was not executed at the circus lot. Another place of possible place of the execution was here on this small hill or small knoll. At least this was where the celebrations at the 150th anniversary of the execution took place, and it's known to be the tallest place in the area, and therefore it could have been known as Depot Hill, but actually no one knows. I just take a walk here to the final place where that has been suggested to me as a place of execution, and we are back on the other side of the track, and we can't see it, I can already tell, as a train is taking up the view. So I don't want to go, no need to go any further, but this is back on the other side of the track. Now that it doesn't matter exactly where Tom was executed at, all the 3 or 4 places I have been directed to is within 500 yards of each other. So no more execution spot. This is the 3rd Street Cemetery in Statesville, very old. The oldest cemetery in Statesville. I will not enter, I have seen gravestones enough in this video, but in this cemetery you will find the graves of, among other, John Woodward, the jailer who kept Tom in prison from 1st of January 1887, when he took over from a previous jailer, until the execution in May 1868. Also the grave of Dr. Wesley Campbell, the doctor who declared Tom dead after the hanging took place. Right after Laura's disappearance, rumor arose that she has been murdered and the body thrown in the Yadkin River. I'm standing and looking at the Yadkin River right now. Today the water is very muddy because of this morning's rainfall. Normally it's clear and you can see the bottom, but that's definitely not the case today. So a body could actually disappear in Yadkin River. However, as it proved to be, it was not, her body was not thrown in the Yadkin River, but was buried in a shallow grave upon Laura Foster Ridge, what is known today as Laura Foster Ridge. As you can see, I'm right now at Tom Dooley Road, and this is the road where Tom's grave is. Over on the other side of 268 is a historic marker telling about Tom Dooley's grave, and that is where I will go next and end this video with a look at Tom's grave. This small path leads to Tom Dooley's grave. He was buried in a family cemetery belonging to his father, his grandfather Bennett Doula, whose house was on top of this hill. It's long gone, nothing is left. It's a small family cemetery. Around 20 or 25 people are buried there, but only one, the grave, has a stone, and that's set up in modern times, and that's Tom Dooley's grave. Previously to the modern stone was an old field stone. Oh, it's very, very wet here after the rain this morning. As you can see, the road is right down there, but I'm about 30-35 feet above the road, so it's not possible to see the grave from the road, like was the case with Anne Melton's grave. But now I'm approaching Tom Dooley Stone, or what's left of it. Somebody has broken pieces of the stone as souvenirs, and that resulted in the area here being closed to the public. But here is Tom Dooley Stone with some nice flowers on it, hanged May 1st, 1866 for the murder of Laura Foster. This is of course not true, as he was hanged May 1st, 1868 for the murder of Laura Foster. On his footstone, the year is right, 1868, but there's nothing about the date. His birth is given as 1845, which may be right. It's not certain if he was born in 1844 or 1845. Most sources will believes he was born in 1844, but the census records from 1860 tells that he was 15 at the time, and the census was taken after his birthday on June 20th. And this is the original stone from Tom's grave. As you can see, it's just a plain field stone or river stone with no markings on it. In those days, everybody knew where everybody else was buried. So if you were poor and couldn't afford a real gravestone, you just found a nice stone at the river or in the fields and placed it on the grave. Today, this original stone is exhibited at the Whippoorwill Academy and Village in Ferguson, North Carolina. So with this last glimpse of Tom's final resting place, I will end this video. I have been Daddy Sage, showing places connected to the Tom Dooley Laura Foster murder case from 1866. Thank you for watching. If you want to watch more videos from me, click the subscribe button and press the bell in order to get alerted whenever I upload new videos, which will hopefully be more often than it has been for the last year or so.